Welcome to the Madness and Grace podcast, where we explore the connection between mental health and faith. I'm Dr. Matthew Stanford, neuroscientist, author, and mental health advocate.
And I'm Dr. Madeline Stiers, therapist and trauma researcher. We're so glad you're joining us today. Each week, we have authentic conversations about personal stories, we share professional insights, and explore the meaningful ways faith can influence mental well-being.
Whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or simply a new perspective, we're here to journey with you. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's dive into today's conversation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Madness and Grace podcast. Thank you for joining us again today for another episode. Today, we're going to be talking about dealing with anxiety as a person of faith, and what does that look like? So, Matt, I guess from a neuroscience perspective, tell us a little bit about what anxiety is and how does that present physiologically, but also psychologically?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the problems that we get into, particularly as people of faith, is we do not think about emotions as having a physiological basis. We think about them as like some little invisible cloud floating over our head, when in reality, you have in your brain a system that assesses the environment continually for threat, and it generates fear when it recognizes a threat in the environment. Now, what you might recognize as a threat and what I might recognize as a threat can be very different. I mean, some things can be absolute. Like if a tiger walked into your office right now or a tiger walked into my office, we would have very similar response. But you might, recognize a threat. And when I say threat, I'm not necessarily talking like a life and limb kind of threat. It could be an emotional threat, it could be whatever, but you might have a different threat level than I have. And so what we get from a physiological perspective is when we generate fear, it's the classic, we will have an increased heart rate, we'll have increased respiration, all the blood in the extremities. It's a fight or flight kind of response. All the blood in our extremities is pushed to the middle of our body. Basically, you are prepared to fight, or you're prepared to flee, or you freeze. That's the other thing that occurs. And so, your immune system shuts down. So it's all this physiological stuff that goes on. And usually that occurs for a short period of time. And then you're out of the situation and then you calm back down. But we all know what it is to have that feeling. We all have had a test that was coming up and we were nervous we weren't going to do well, so we feel it. We feel that. But that's driven by our brains. That's not something that you can just think your way out of. So if someone's having a panic attack, for instance, which is where the system in your brain kind of runs amok and you begin to have those physiological responses, but there is nothing in the environment that would be generating that, that person can oftentimes very matter of fact tell you, I know that there's nothing for me to be afraid of right now, but I'm absolutely terrified. I think I'm going to die. I'm having all these feelings. In fact, you could be injected with epinephrine and cause a person to have a panic attack. Even though you tell them before you inject them what's going to happen, they tell you they're not afraid of anything. It's something out of their control. But now we also want to kind of move over to the side where, anxiety and worry. Worry is a kind of a form of anxiety. It's not really, anxiety is more fear. Worry is more stress, but they're certainly on the same continuum. And so we worry about things like, I worry that there might be bad traffic when I leave to go home today, and it might take me an hour to drive home as opposed to what it normally takes, kind of a thing. I might be concerned about that, and it might cause me to feel odd, but it's not the same thing as being fearful in the sense of that full physiological response. And so I think we have to understand as Christians that emotions they're built into us and they're not bad things. It is not a bad thing to be anxious. So I want to tell you the good side of anxiety, and then I'll let you jump in. So when you're having that test that's coming up, one of the reasons that you study for it is anxiety, because it's aversive when you're anxious. And the way, for instance, when I went to school, and I still do it today, and I know you do it as well, on the presentations that, we make, although maybe we may need to do it a little bit more here on the podcast, is that we over-prepare, okay? We over-prepare for presentations that we make. We've said this to each other many times, and I did it when I was in school and I was studying for my degrees, is that I would over-prepare for every test because that made me feel better, that I was more likely to do well. And there was certainly a point where I came and I said to myself, I have studied more than enough for this test. But to keep the worry, the concern down, I would study even more, and that would make me feel better. So there is a good aspect to it. The tiger walking into your office. If you don't have any anxiety, you get eaten. And that, that is why we have that. It's a God-given thing. So a lot of times I've heard Christians say, well, it says right there in Philippians 4, 6, and 7, be anxious for nothing, or don't be anxious about anything, depending on your translation. That is not Paul telling you that you should never have anxiety, the normal anxiety that is a good thing. It's more a discussion of don't worry about things that God has said he's going to take care of.
Right.
You can trust him. And just because you have anxiety does not mean you're not trusting God. God put a system in your brain that does these things, and it's for your benefit. But when a person has an anxiety disorder, that system has gotten out of control and it's a mess and it needs to be treated.
Yeah. So typically we see, so like you were saying, you get stressed or anxious about something. And for you, studying, it was the test. So studying, anxiety prompts you, right, to action.
Prompts you, absolutely.
It prompts you to action to help eliminate or reduce that emotion of anxiety. Right. But what we see with people who struggle with anxiety or may have an anxiety disorder is that it can actually freeze them, right? Like the anxiety becomes too much so that they're not able, like you said, you get eaten by the lion or the tiger.
That fight, flight, or freeze. That's the three. So
right. And so now they say there's fawn, that people are saying that there's a fight, freeze, or fawn. It's more of a trauma. Anyways, I'm getting aside from myself. But
you mentioned freeze, so I want the listeners to put that in context. Imagine if you just froze in life. You're not able
and
to
people
function. You're so anxious, you're so fearful, you're seeing so much threat in your environment, you freeze. And that's how you live every day.
Bills don't get paid, you don't make it to work, you end up losing your job, you're not tending to your relationships. Yeah, I mean, it seems minimal, but it really can compound and it becomes extremely problematic. So anxiety can really, I mean, even if you're not having panic attacks, right? You don't have to have a panic disorder to have a high level of anxiety.
No, not at all.
Your thoughts can run away with themselves. You fall into these thinking traps. So really working on managing what thinking trap am I falling into? Like what's going on? So what is a thinking trap? A thinking trap is, I think you kind of mentioned this earlier. Might have been in another episode, but as a human, we all have thoughts, right? So we have our internal kind of running dialogue, right? And we have stressors in life. And so when a stressor occurs or something happens that we perceive as kind of negative, we all have traps in our brain that we tend to fall into. So a common example that I like to give is we've got a 13-year-old who's walking down the hallway at school and there's a group of their peers that starts to giggle. What is the thought? They're laughing at me.
Right.
That's what almost every 13-year-old is going to think. What's wrong? Do I have something on me? Are they making fun of my body? Did I say something silly in class that they're mocking now? Like, what's going on? And they have no idea that you exist. They're not laughing at you.
And you have no evidence for that. But
and you have no evidence. But you've decided. And then your next interactions with them are weird, or maybe you say something rude to them. I mean, like, so you fall into the thinking trap of mind reading. You are reading their mind. And there's a whole list we could read off. You can get online and think common thinking traps.
My favorite thinking trap is catastrophizing.
Yeah.
I'm an expert at that. And so catastrophizing is, something occurs, whatever it may be, and you take that to the absolute catastrophic end. So that might be we didn't get a grant here at the Hope and Healing Center that we thought we were going to get this month. And so that means that I'm going to have to lay everyone off. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be homeless. It can be that extreme. That's what a person who catastrophizes does. And every little thing that happens is a catastrophe. It's like that. It's like, oh, I can't get on that airplane. It's going to crash. I can't, it's just, it's extreme and irrational fears almost, and you can't move beyond them. So no, these thinking traps are, if I would recommend to our listeners, they can go out and just Google some thinking traps. I think you'll be shocked to find that you probably have a few that.
Living in Houston's a hard one because we do have catastrophes.
Absolutely.
You go, it might flood and destroy my house. That's happened before.
If it starts raining, if it starts raining and then you say, oh, this, I'm going to catastrophize this into a flood that destroys my house.
Right.
Well, that happens,
You got proof there, yeah.
I want to circle back real quick. You asked me about the anxiety and I wrote down on some notes here. I want people to understand that anxiety it's emotional, it's physical, and it's cognitive. So on the emotional side, that might be worry or dread. On the physical side, kind of racing heart or tension, sweating. On the cognitive side, it might be rumination, where you can't get out of a cycle where you keep thinking about the same thing over and over, or fear of the future. You're afraid to move forward. And so I want people to understand it's much more than just like I have a thought and I have to stop thinking that, because I wish it was that easy. But I also would say to that anxiety, at least in mental health, or I should say problem anxiety, because anxiety is normal.
Right.
It's perfectly normal to have anxiety at a normal level for normal experiences. Problem anxiety is likely the most treatable of all mental health problems. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it doesn't. Here's the problem: you tell someone with anxiety that this is treatable, they go, "No, it's not."
Right? Yeah,
it's not. Because they're so worried that it's not. Right? Their anxiety is through the roof. So it's almost some of the hardest parts of working with someone with anxiety or treating them is really convincing them that, like, you just got to start. You got to start working on it, and it will come. Right? It's because they're like,
it doesn't fix it in one session.
Right. Yeah. And they're frozen or they're running away from it. And, there's, it's an interesting one to navigate. But really, I think a lot of the struggle with anxiety is helping people understand what it is. Because if you have anxiety about a test, makes sense. Now, it may be problematic, the level of anxiety, but there's at least, right, you say it is because of this situation. If you've got like generalized anxiety disorder or panic disorder,
it's all over the place.
There's right. You have this like extreme level of impending doom that's weighing on you. And everyone goes, what is it about? You go, I don't know. I just know I'm going to die and everything's going to be terrible and it's all going to go to the worst way. And so helping someone understand what's happening with them in those kind of ways that you just outlined, I think is really important. And saying like if we can navigate some of these thinking traps and talk about physiologically what's going on, it's definitely treatable.
Well, now we entitled this "Dealing with Anxiety as a Person of Faith," and we did that because sadly we have both seen within faith communities and within religious clients that we work with that there's a lot of negativity towards individuals who have anxiety issues or are struggling with anxiety within faith communities. And typically what you get is something along the lines of, well, what do you have in your life to be anxious about? You just need to just get over it. Whereas within faith communities, you hear things like, well, you're just not trusting God enough.
You just need to give it to God.
You just need to give it to God. You need to pray more. If you had more faith, you wouldn't be so anxious. Anxiety is a sin, which I have heard more times than I can count. But I want to just throw out a verse here. We get the Philippians 4, 6, and 7 verse all the time. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition. That's the Philippians 4. So where people say, well, you should never be anxious. I literally had a pastor tell me that. You should never be anxious. But I would tell people, let's focus on Psalm 94:19. Okay. Psalm 94:19 says this: when anxiety was great within me, your consolation brought me joy. So that verse right there assumes that you have anxious thoughts. It assumes that. It also assumes that those thoughts are troubling. Okay. So, we're probably talking more than the guy was concerned about, was he going to get his house painted that day or whatever? Okay. But your consolation brought me joy. So it really is saying I'm anxious. And so I begin to think about the things of the Lord, how God loves me, what God's done for me. God created me. I mean, it promises that God has made in the Bible. I mean, and that those then bring me some joy. It doesn't say I'm never going to be anxious again. It also doesn't say I was anxious and you told me I was sinning, so I stopped. I mean, it just simply assumes that as a human, we will have times of anxiety, and that one of the ways that we can deal with those is we can begin to think about the promises and the truths of God and his character. That's what I'm not saying is that is a treatment for anxiety disorders in and of itself. Can it be a part of a intervention for people with mental health problems? Absolutely. But I think we have to separate, and maybe I haven't done that enough here. We need to separate the idea that we all have anxiety at normal levels, and that is normal. Okay.
Right.
And then we cross a line when anxiety becomes a problem, when we've lost control of it. Now, not because we did something, but because the system in our brain has either been damaged by an external event, such as a trauma, or it is just not functioning correctly. So it's generating fear. And when you cross the line would be what you're afraid of and what you're anxious of is irrational.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm afraid to leave my house because something bad will happen, even though there's no evidence that will happen. So I'm what we call agoraphobic. I'm afraid to leave my home. That's an irrational fear. If I don't want to go to work because my boss gave me a big project and it's due today at 10 o'clock in a meeting and I never worked on it, that's normal anxiety that you're having. Okay, that's perfectly normal. And you know what? You can think about the consolations of God that might bring you joy, but the fact is that you just didn't do what you were supposed to do, and that's why you're anxious. And so I think we have to understand that, that's normal anxiety, and that's appropriate. So there's a separation. So one of the things I would really encourage people within faith communities to do, both for themselves and for others, particularly if they're ministry people, is let's separate disordered anxiety from normal anxiety. And because there's a huge difference. There's an absolutely huge difference.
Right.
And let's not shame people by saying you should not experience an emotion that God put a system in your brain to generate to try to keep you safe and to motivate you to do things that will make your life better. And then the third thing would be, let's not keep people that have a dysfunctional neurological system from getting the care they should get when God has provided that care.
Yeah. I think understanding that there are this kind of, it's like a spectrum, right? But the two normal level of anxiety to problematic anxiety, disordered anxiety, and really kind of understanding, like, especially if you're ministering to people at whatever level of anxiety that the person is dealing with, understanding that God gave us these emotions. God gave us emotions for a reason, right? Like they're there for a purpose. And so we need to be aware of that. And that's totally fine. It prompts us to do things. It's there to help us, right? And when it becomes problematic, we should be able to reach out to people and places that are a source of comfort. And if you're talking with someone in a faith community or a friend or a family, like whoever, and you're like, I don't know if their level of anxiety or stress is like hindering their lives, like they've become kind of immobilized in their ability to really take care of the things that they need to be taken care of, or they're so anxious and stressed that you can see it like vibrating off of them. And we all kind of know that person that's so anxious that they're like shaking with this energy, right? Because their brains are firing. Being able to say like I'm here to talk to you, especially if they're reaching out looking for support. Like, I'm here to talk to you. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to be a place of a safe place of comfort. And, let's talk about, do you want to help me to help you find a referral for a therapist that may be able to help, and start having that conversation with them? Because, if you're a place of comfort or safety for someone who is really struggling with their anxiety, that's wonderful that you can offer that. And their anxiety, if it's disordered anxiety or problematic anxiety, it's not going to necessarily get better because they're talking to you about it, right? That's part of the process, right? Like your spiritual and relational connections with people can be part of your treatment, but also getting them connected to a professional that might be able to further help them identify what's going on a little bit more specifically, give them some psychoeducation, and then work towards a clinical treatment plan, I think is important. And your role in faith community, if you're not a clinician or you're not a doctor, is not to take on that. It's to help get them connected to someone, a provider.
Right. And I think, to that, I would say, it's important that people realize there's no shame in going to a counselor. And there's no shame in talking to your primary care physician about the fact that you're so anxious that you're struggling to perform your job or maintain relationships or whatever. When we're talking about that disordered level of anxiety, there's no shame in that. These are provisions that God has made for us so that we can move beyond these things. And so there are treatments and they are effective, and there's nothing wrong with a Christian going to a therapist, a counselor, or taking psychiatric medication that would improve their life. And so I really want to stress that. But I also want to talk a little bit here about the things that we as individuals could do ourselves in addition to just going to a mental health care provider or a physician, because I think they also would recommend these as well. I think if you find that you are a particularly anxious person, there are any number of relaxation techniques that you could learn, and they're very helpful when you become very anxious. But they're also helpful if you use them, kind of preventatively. If you, for instance, let's say you learn some breathing techniques that help relax you. If you do those on a daily basis, even when you're not anxious, they do make it easier for you to relax when you're becoming anxious. I think another thing is regular exercise for people who find that they are what you might call worriers. If you exercise regularly, and I don't mean you have to go and lift weights for an hour and a half or something. I mean, if you just go for a walk 3 times a week, 20 minutes or whatever, regular exercise has an absolutely tremendous effect. In fact, I read a study once that 6 weeks of consistent yoga had the same effect as somebody who took an anti-anxiety medication. So, I mean, they really can have tremendous effects. And so I think, regular exercise. And then beyond that, we get into more healthy eating, staying away from things like caffeine and minimizing processed foods and sugar intake. I mean, these things all play a role. Now, no one of them, there isn't some, I would be a billionaire and I would not be on this podcast right now, probably, if there was some here are the 5 things you need to eat and you'll never be anxious. Because remember, anxiety is normal, okay? What we're doing is we're trying to maintain anxiety at a normal level. And we're talking about people who have anxiety at an extreme level. So if you find yourself to be a worrier, there are some things you can do proactively. Like I said, you can learn relaxation techniques. You can minimize stress in your life the best you can by setting up boundaries and things like that. You can exercise regularly. You can eat healthier. And you can go and meet with a counselor or a therapist or talk to your physician. And as you mentioned, Maddie, just having a really good friend that listens, giving you the opportunity to just kind of pour out your heart and vent and things like that. And that can be tremendously therapeutic as well. So there's a lot that you can do on your side. And there's a lot you can do as a person of faith in a faith community as you encourage others to be involved in these types of things. One of the things I wanted to mention is at the Hope and Healing Center, we have a nightly support line. It's 5 to 8 p.m. Central Time, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, where you can call and you can talk to a trained mental health coach and you can get a half-hour coaching on the phone. They can help you with these types of issues, and they can then give you referrals to mental health care providers if you would like that or you need that. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that number, it's a free call and you can call as many times as you need to work through issues. I'll make sure that number is in the notes below. But I really think a lot of times it's just about finding support and finding people that can help you walk through these different situations.
Yeah, I think even maybe before all of those things that you just outlined is really acknowledging, internally with yourself, what you're experiencing or being able to identify it. Maybe you're avoiding it. Maybe you're not aware, you're just unaware of what you're experiencing. But the way I like to explain anxiety is it's so uncomfortable to experience that, right? It is not a fun emotion to have. And so what we see people doing is they say, as a therapist, this is what I see clients saying, is they just try to avoid it. Right? Either numbing out drugs and alcohol, or they're doing other things. They're just kind of distracting themselves to an unhealthy extent, just zoning out and watching TV all day, reading for hours and hours on end. They're trying to avoid the emotion. But Anxiety, you can think of it as you're in a room and anxiety shows up. It's outside the door and there's a little window in the door and it's knocking at the door. And you look over at it and you go, oh, no, I'm not doing that today. No, I'm not letting you in. And it doesn't go away. Just ignoring it doesn't make the feeling go away. Oftentimes the thoughts that are maybe enhancing it continue, grow louder. And so the banging just gets louder and louder and louder. And the anxiety doesn't go away, the anxiety grows. So really being able to acknowledge and say, like, this is what I'm experiencing right now. And if you've ever been to a therapist, they've probably had you look at a feelings chart or a feelings wheel, emotion wheel. Acknowledging what it is that you're experiencing and that it's becoming a problem and it's distressing and you don't like it. And then being able to implement all of those other things can become a little bit easier. Because if you're avoiding it, you're not going to say, let me practice some breathing. Right. Because you're going, I'm not anxious. I don't want to experience that. No. Right. So really being able to have some self-awareness as to what's going on really can impact your ability to take the next steps towards managing it.
And avoidance of all types of things and isolation are like people's that's the first thing they do when they get anxious. And then usually the second thing they do, unfortunately, is consume a substance that will make them feel better. And so those are all negative coping strategies. And what we were talking about earlier were more positive ones.
Yeah.
From a faith perspective, there's also a number of faith-oriented things that you can do that I think have been demonstrated to be very effective. I mean, number one, we know, from the research that people who have an active faith life, and a lot of times that's just measured by how important their faith is to them, or a measure of, say, something, how often they attend their faith community, weekly or monthly. And usually what you find is people that have an active faith life tend to show lower levels of anxiety and depression. Now, we can look at that, I can look at that as a person of faith and I can maybe say, well, see that you've got a strong faith. And so faith makes you not have those problems. But why is it that happens? Is that because I'm a better Christian than you are or something like that? And really what the research shows is that it's more of a, when you're in a faith community and you're actively involved, you've got really two things that a person outside that faith community doesn't have. One is you have a connection to a transcendent God who you've been taught cares for you and is in control of what is occurring, good or bad. What is happening around you is in control of that. And that allows you to say, okay, well, I'm not in control. And so I'm going to let that go. I'm going to trust that God is good and he's going to do what's best for me, whatever that might look for. And then secondly, you have what we've just been talking about. And that is you have a built-in support group. I mean, you have a whole set of people around you that you can talk to, that can pray for you, can pray with you, can be present with you, who could help you in situations, and that you can trust them. And so those are the kind of things that you're looking for in a faith community, a place that teaches you the truths about God, that grows your spiritual life, and a place where people are supportive and care for you. And those things are tremendously therapeutic. And so, I think that we have to understand that being involved in an active faith community where people care for you and your spiritual life is growing, tremendously beneficial in the context of an anxiety. Not to say that people there wouldn't have anxiety issues. I'm just saying tremendously beneficial. Prayer is an incredibly useful tool for all types of reasons. But, when you survey individuals who are at chronically high levels of psychological distress, people that, for instance, are terminally ill or things like that, you find almost every time when you ask them, what is it they do to deal with those levels of distress? It's prayer. Prayer, is always the one that's mentioned. And so, certainly the study of the scriptures, at worship, all of these things kind of work together. And I think it's important that as people of faith, we include those in ways that we're trying to deal with disordered anxiety. Not that they in and of themselves are the way to get rid of it necessarily, and not because the anxiety you have is a result of you not having a good faith. It's just that as people of faith, those are things that are beneficial to us, and we should use them in situations that we find ourselves in that are difficult. And so I just think we need to get away from this idea that somehow people that show anxiety are less, or I should say people that have disordered anxiety are less of a believer than those who don't have that. That pastor that said to me that Christians should never have anxiety, it's kind of laughable. I mean, I'm sure he had anxiety in his life.
Yeah.
But it's also pretty disturbing because if you look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, I mean, literally the night before he's going to be tortured and then executed in a horrible, impossible to imagine way. And he knew that was going to happen. I would say that given some of the things he says, Father, is there any way you can take this away from me? He's pretty anxious. And I would say pretty rightly so anxious. Because I imagine if you knew that you were going to be tortured and executed tomorrow in an incredibly painful way, you would probably be pretty anxious too. And he was fully human. And I think that's one of the amazing things about Christianity is that, we know that Jesus is both human and God at the same time. And he understands what we're going through. So the next time some goofy guy tells you, well, you shouldn't be anxious, and so don't take that medicine that your doctor gave you, and you just need to pray more, don't listen to him. Listen to, say Luke 22. Yeah, listen to us. Listen to Luke 22, where Jesus is, very anguished in the garden, and he's crying out to God, and realize that Jesus understands what you're going through, and that God has provided for you resources and services through places like the Hope and Healing Center, where you can get the help that you need to get that disordered anxiety under control.
In that same line, if someone comes to you and they are struggling with stress or anxiety, instead of being the person that says, well, don't worry about that, or you shouldn't have that anxiety,
stop worrying.
Stop doing that, right? Be compassionate and try to, here's the thing, even if what they're anxious about, you're like, I don't get why you're anxious about that. Because if it's disordered, you may not understand. You may not see the connection that they're making. It may not be rational, right? That doesn't change the fact that they are experiencing that feeling. And you, as a human, have likely experienced stress and anxiety. So it's not to say like, yeah, you should be stressed about that. Don't validate something that's invalid if the stress doesn't match the situation. But you can validate that they're experiencing that and say, you seem very worried. You seem very stressed. The anxiety is very high. I can see that. And that's not a fun place to be because we've all been there. And so if you can get to the point where you can say, like, I see that in you, how can I help? And it's not maybe making them see the error in their anxiety, right? It's right there in that moment. That's not what your purpose is for. It's to help them to feel a little bit safer so you can get them, to kind of a little bit more care if they may
listen
need it.
More, fix less. That's
listen
what I would
more,
say.
fix less. Yeah.
Just listen, because them getting it off their chest, them speaking, it's going to be very beneficial. And as you said, affirm their feelings. You don't have to worry about trying to fix irrational fears or things like that. And then if you do have the opportunity and the knowledge, refer them to a mental health care provider or give them the Hope Line number or, help them move in that direction. But, they're asking you to listen to them and to connect with them emotionally. And, I see that as a very Christian thing to do. And they're not asking you to tell them they're wrong or tell them they're right. They're just having an experience and they want you to be part of that experience so that they might be able to move forward. So anxiety is a particularly difficult one for the church, unfortunately. You have less of a problem if someone has schizophrenia, although, we certainly could have a discussion around that as well, where people kind of over-spiritualize. And I think at the end of the day, that's what I would say to kind of close this out is let's not over-spiritualize these things. We could have sat here for an hour and talked about normal anxiety. And normal anxiety is God-given and very beneficial. And so, let's not over-spiritualize something that is gone abnormal in someone's brain just because we have never experienced that or we believe that we have some understanding of that that's beyond what they have, when in reality, we may or may not have a better understanding. Let's be compassionate. Let's be caring. Let's point people to God. Let's not drive them away. Let's not shame them for feelings that they have. And let's be present with them as they begin to try to kind of work through this. And let's also recognize and receive the good providence of God, which is counselors and therapists and medications, obviously when needed, but certainly they are needed. And there's an opportunity for us to help people engage those as a faith community. So you have any final thoughts, Maddie?
I think in line with that, I'm going to repeat what you said earlier is, if you're dealing with anxiety or just need someone to listen to, talk to spiritually, whatever, call the Hope line. It's a free phone line. It's a warm line that we offer in the evenings. You can call from anywhere. It's free for 30 minutes. You can talk to someone. The number is 832-831-7337. And that is, like I said, every night, 365 days a year from 5 to 8 p.m. Central Time. Well, we'll put the details in the description of this episode as well. And I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and we'll see you next week.
See you again.
Thanks for joining our conversation on this episode of the Madness and Grace podcast. If you found value in our discussion today, we'd love it if you'd subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode.
And if you enjoyed what you heard, please consider leaving us a rating and review. It helps others find these important conversations.
Sharing this podcast with friends and family members is also a wonderful way to extend hope to those who might be struggling with mental health concerns.
We'll be back next time with another candid conversation about madness and grace. See you then.